Conference will now be recorded.
Okay. So once again, welcome everybody. Hope everybody had a beautiful, good to see you. How have you been? Not too bad. No, that's not a good answer. The answer is great. Thank God. Baruch Hashem. That's the answer. I was saying not too bad means I'm giving God a C minus. We don't give God a C minus. Not too bad means it's bad, but it's not too bad. No, no, no. It's good. It's great. Thank you, God. Thank you, thank you, thank you, God. Hodul Hashem kitov, kili olam chazdo. Good. We thank Hashem. It is good. His compassion is eternal. Okay. So as we begin the year 5786, 5,786 years since the time of creation, as we began on Rosh Hashanah, the question always comes up, Rabbi, I'm not sure which hole you just crawled out of, but science puts this world at 14, 15 billion years. Hello, Ken. That's where science puts it. And I don't know if you ever noticed, but there's something called dinosaur bones that were found, right? And they were, and we have Neanderthal man, right? Going back a lot more than 5,786 years. So how do we resolve this? Or better yet, what are different pathways of possible resolution of this, assuming that both are correct? And we'll deal with that assumption in just a moment. And I think it's important. I know from myself personally, when it comes to these sort of things, I don't need this is the answer. I need to have possibilities. And as a story that I've told over tens, if not hundreds of times, that the rabbi who survived the Holocaust, and afterwards people said to him, Rabbi, don't you have questions? And he says, oh, do I have questions? I got more questions than you can imagine. I also believe that God has the answer. And my concern is if I ask these questions too stridently, God will say, come here, and I'll give you the answer. So I'm willing to not ask the question so stridently. And when the time comes, I will understand it all. And with me, in a similar way, as long as there are different approaches that I consider to be reasonable, tenable, okay, great. What is the actual response answer? What is? After 120 years, I'm not pushing it. I'll be happy to find out over there. But I think it's very important what we have here as the preface. And that is, as we begin, if there is an apparent clash between science and Torah, there are three basic approaches to deal with this. Meaning, our understanding is as follows. The same way, for example, that if I want to know what was the blueprint? How was this building built? There are two ways I can go about doing that. I can bring in an expert architect who be able to examine this building, measure this building, and tell me, oh, the way that this was built was in this manner. This is how they had to do it. This is the foundations. This is how it was done. Or I can go into the office and dust off the original blueprints and see this is how it was built. I could either work forward, I could work backwards. I could see from what plans it was built forward, or I can examine the here and now and then understand what was in the past. And that is basically Torah and science. Science is examining the world and our understanding of it, our ever deepening understanding and appreciation of this incredible world, and understanding then working backwards what must have been, whether we'll see it is through the expanding universe, at what rate, and therefore where did it begin, or through the isotopes and the changes in this world that happen at a certain pace. And therefore, if it's happened this amount of times, I know when, right? All these beautiful, incredibly ingenious means that science applies is taking the world as we have it today and working our way backwards and understanding what was. That is science. Torah is the word teaching, and it's God having revealed to us what was going to happen, what will be happening. And if both of those are being done accurately, then there will never be a contradiction. So again, if there is an apparent clash between science and Torah, there are three basic approaches. Number one, maybe we have misunderstood the science. Maybe science has not yet gotten it fully correct. We must never regard science as an absolute against which Torah must be made to fit. Much, although probably not all of 20th century science, will be overturned by the end of the 21st century. You know, when people ask me about kashrut, I like to say that I was born, I don't look this old, I was born BC, before cholesterol. That's when I was born, right? When I was a kid growing up, sure, as many eggs as you want. Cholesterol was not known. Sure, of course, all that's great for you, right? And then we found out cholesterol is the number one killer, causing all the heart disease. And then we find out, well, there's good cholesterol and there's bad cholesterol. So science is constantly moving forward with their understandings. When I was in high school, my science teacher taught us the constant state theory of the world. The world always existed. And he would say to us, listen, whatever your rabbis are telling you in the morning, I'm here to teach you science. The world always existed. That's what he taught us. And then, of course, science realized that that's not true. And there was what they call a Big Bang, right? We still have a dispute. Was there a Big Banger or was just a Big Bang, right? Was there a creator? You know, the way it was put is science reached the apex of the mountain and was surprised to find the creationist was sitting up there already, right? So science is shifting, is constantly. You know, I always say when I studied biology with my daughter when she was taking college biology a number of years ago now, 4, 5, 6 years ago, whatever it was now, I was amazed at how God had raised his game since 1976 when I was taking high school biology. I mean, what goes on in a cell now is incredible. I guess it wasn't going on then in 1970, so we didn't know about it, right? And it was fascinating to read in the textbook that there is a certain part of the mitochondria that scientists are now working to try to understand exactly what does that do. So science is incredible, and there's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, step forward, step back, and constantly adjusting according to what they now understand. So first of all, science is not absolute. Secondly, even though Torah is absolute, our understanding of Torah is not absolute. Maybe we have misunderstood the Torah. Assume that Torah is much more sophisticated than you think. 3, maybe they are both correct, but are looking at different questions. Science is how, Torah is why, working on different levels of reality. And this is something that Rabbi Sachs speaks about often. The Torah is not, for example, in this week's Parsha, we hear about the rainbow and different opinions that a double rainbow, single rainbow, but the rainbow is a sign that God is not going to bring destruction to the world. What do you mean, Rabbi? Please, Rabbi. A rainbow is because of the condensation in the air that happens after a rain, and the way that the sunlight hits that can create a rainbow. That's what a rainbow is. And it's two different questions with the same answer. Meaning, one question is, what is the physics of when a rainbow appears? What is the science of when a rainbow appears? And that's the science, right? But the question is, when, right? Not after every rain is there a rainbow. So when will God show us, to those who understand the rainbow to mean a simple rainbow, when will God decide to have all of those um, meteorological aspects aligned that there will be a visible rainbow? That's a different question. So Torah is, science is how, Torah is why. Again, Rabbi Sachs says very beautifully that people often mistakenly think, and they say that religion, that science has replaced religion. And he says, no, science has replaced polytheism. Polytheism means there's a rain god, and there's a fire god, and there's an ocean god, and there's a this god. And science has explained, no, it's not these different gods, but science lets us know when these things are coming about. That's what's causing these things. It's not the rain god or this god. But monotheism is not explaining nature. Monotheism is the idea that there is this one God force that is overarchingly in charge and orchestrating all of the science that takes place. So science can replace polytheism, doesn't replace monotheism. One is how, the other is why. Okay. Now, let's move forward a little bit into the age of the universe. The Rambam entirely rejects Kadmut Ha'olam. Kadmut Ha'olam means that the world was always here. And writes at length in Moreh Nevuchim, that's the Guide to the Perplexed, in part 2, chapter 25, disproving this. Disproving it not based on psukim, not based on verses, but based on his understanding of science as he was writing it. However, and this is so crucially important and surprising, he also writes, if, however, we accepted the eternity of the universe in accordance with Plato, La Briut, we would not be in opposition to the fundamental principles of our religion. What do you mean? The first pasuk is Bereshit, in the beginning, God created. How could Rambam say that if it will be proven true that there was no beginning of this universe, but the constant state that I was taught in ninth grade or whatever grade it was true? How could he say that it would not be in opposition to the fundamental principle of our religion? And he goes on to say, the scripture might have been explained accordingly. And many expressions might have been found in the Bible and other writings which would confirm and support this theory. In other words, right, Rambam says a founding principle, a primary foundational, I should say, principle of Judaism is God's non-corporeality, God not having a body. What do you mean? It says in the Torah, God stretched out his arm. It is the finger of God, God's eyes, God hears, right? The Torah is filled with these human body attributions to God. However, we explain each and every one of those as what's called anthropomorphism, which is giving a human characteristic to that which is not human in order for us to understand it. And therefore, God sees means God's awareness, and God's arm means God's strength, etc., etc., etc. So Rambam says we can understand if necessary, meaning if it would be clear that the world always existed, we could explain those psukim, those verses, also in a allegorical manner, as we explain God's hand, God's fingers, God's eyes, etc. Okay? However, and this would not be in opposition to the fundamental principles of our religion. What I'm understanding him saying is as follows. The fundamental principle of our religion is that there's a God, and he wants us to elevate ourselves and elevate the world around us. That is, according to the Sefer HaIkarim, there are three. He disagrees with Rambam's of the Rambam's organization of it as 13 principles of faith, as we have as the Rambam, as our Yigdal song, prayer, actually goes through those 13 principles of faith of the Rambam. He says that there are three foundational principles of faith. And that is, well, remember, you should not err, E-R-R, don't err. E is the existence of God, R is revelation, and R is reward and punishment, that there's repercussions of our actions. Okay? And whether the world always existed or whether there was a point of creation, that doesn't change my responsibility and the Torah's guidance teaching me how it is that I'm supposed to live an uplifted and godly life. Okay. The Torah states that Adam Harishon was created 57, we're now 86 years ago. And the creation of the rest of the universe took 6 days before that. Thus, the age of the universe is 5786 years plus 6 days. Scientists are unanimous that the universe is much older than that. Estimates vary between 10 and 20 billion years. That's quite a range, but it's nowhere near 5,786. This date is not arrived at through a theoretical construct, but by observable evidence from a variety of sources, which all validate this estimate. Yes, Rav Shlomo.
Sorry.
Okay, I'll continue then. When you swallow, you let me know. You good?
Science has changed in their opinion. You know, we talk about days of creation, but isn't it so that what we consider the days of creation are not 24-hour days?
Okay. So that's why I was careful to say 57,000 years, 5,700 plus years, and 6 days of creation. And that is an approach that we'll come on to. Yes, that you're making a good point, right? In other words, the 6 days of creation, the argument could be made that we're not necessarily talking about a 24-hour period, because by Erev, by Boker, it was evening, it was day, but the sun, as we know it, was not suspended until day 4. Okay? So therefore, clearly we're talking about some other means of measuring Erev Boker, right? Evening, morning. Erev also means mixture. Boker means a clarity. Okay? So yes, we will come to that. But before we get there, again, science is not just, pulling things out of thin air, right? Variety of sources which all validate this estimate. This evidence includes the observable existence of galaxies billions of light years away, assuming the constancy of the speed of light. Then these galaxies existed billions of years ago. In other words, it's really, this is kind of like mind-bending, that when we look up at the night sky and we see a star, there's an excellent chance that that star does not exist. That star does not exist. So what are we seeing? We're seeing the light that it emitted millions, billions, whatever it is, of light years ago, and that light has now reached us. But it might no longer be shooting out light. We have no way of knowing that because any light that it would be sending out would not reach us for another 15, 20, or a million years. Right? Like I said, it's a little bit mind-bending. But when you see the star in the sky, you're not seeing the star in the sky. You're seeing the light that that star emitted billions of years ago. But 1 second. So if I know the rate of light, all right, and so then I can see just how far away that was when it emitted its light and how long ago it must have been existing. Okay? When I can observe galaxies billions of light years away, right? So then they were emitting their light billions of years ago. A. B. Radioactive dating elements found in rocks. When applied to rocks on the surface of Earth, the oldest rocks are about 3.8 billion years old. When applied to meteorites, the oldest are 4.5 billion years old. This is understood to be the age of the solar system. Okay. C. Measuring the luminosity of old star clusters gives ages of around 12 billion years. I don't fully understand that. Yes.
Well, we have constellations. So, and
Astronomers.
astronomy, and actually, ancient civilizations, even ours, we go by Libra and Virgo and all these other things. But if these stars are no longer there, then what?
It'll be a problem a couple million years from now when they try to look at the sky and say, hey, where did that one go?
Well, yeah.
Like I said, it's a little bit mind, right? Yes. And the way before GPS and all of that, the way that ships would navigate the oceans was through looking at these constellations. However, what they're actually seeing is light that was emitted millions of years ago.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but then that would mean we don't really even have Sagittarius and.
We might not.
Yeah, okay.
Then
We might not.
That's not too complicated.
We might not. Yeah.
I was kind of ambivalent about
D.
Sagittarius anyway.
On a more theoretical basis, the observable expansion of the universe seen by redshift in the more distant stars can be extrapolated using the Hubble constant to a point of the original Big Bang about 15 billion years ago. Again, right? I'm not a scientist, right? But what proved the Big Bang to science was this idea of this observable expanding universe, which means that it had its point and it's been expanding. So then by working backwards, right, using a certain mathematical constant, I could see when, if it's expanded to there at this rate, I could see how long ago it was that one point from which it began to expand. Yes. Let me. Oh, yes, Steve.
I'm not sure I'm not sure it's proved. I mean, what we do is we can say it's consistent with the current theory.
Yeah. Fair enough. Granted, right? Things are always shifting. Right now, that is the accepted understanding.
I think there is, even within some, I have to look this up, but I believe there is now a school of thought which is saying that the Big Bang is not consistent with what they're currently seeing, and they may have to update that.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Which goes back to what we were saying earlier, that science is constantly adjusting, right? So for us to become beholden to science and therefore reject Torah is not only not true, but it's foolish. Yes, Dov.
I'm just thinking a little bit earlier to turn something around. What if there's a galaxy somewhere in the universe with people, and they're looking at our star, our sun, and going, maybe it doesn't exist anymore too,
Yeah, that's possible.
right?
That's a possibility that they can surmise. They won't know for another few million years if they're still seeing it. That's true.
Okay.
Yes, Janet.
And since I didn't know that from what Steve says about the Big Bang, but the other thing is this point area of the Big Bang is supposed to have, because a black hole sucked in so much matter, I think, and then there was an event horizon where it, so then there was nothingness from this point, but before that, where did the matter come from that was sucked in? So I don't know that,
Yeah, yeah,
there
yeah.
may have been something before
yeah,
that.
yeah, 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 yeah. E, different eras evident from rock strata, which show that different types of species existed at different times. Fossils of aquatic creatures, sea, water creatures, in today's mountain ranges, different dinosaurs at different times, and they'll be able to start dating this area, this era, this era, this era, and we get back. So once again, how do we understand this? How do we understand our belief in starting the year 5786 and all of this scientific knowledge, indications, belief, or it's hard to say proofs, but certainly strong indications
Evidence.
about evidence, yeah, about the age of the universe. Approach number one. All right, and let me just preface it like this. All right, Adam and Eve, were they newborn babies when they were created? They're created in an adult state. Right? If one were to cut open one of the trees filled with fruit there and start to count the rings on that tree, what would one see? Probably 300-400 rings, or 30, whatever it would be. It was an adult tree. An adult tree, let's say, has, I'm picking a number, 100 rings in it. Okay?
But those trees were edible, I mean, on the inside and everything.
Not all the trees, whatever they were adult trees.
Yeah.
So now, right, if one were to say, how old is that tree? One could say it's 1 day old, and one could say it's 100 years old. And both are true because it was created on that day of creation. And what was created on that day of creation? 100-year-old tree.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, right, both, well, let's hear. This accepts the scientific analysis, but claims that Hashem made the world to look in an adult state, whereas in fact it is only 86 years old. And this is, let's go through it first, and then we'll take the points. Right? This is from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. The argument from the discovery of fossils is by no means conclusive evidence of the great antiquity of the earth for the following reasons. A, in view of the unknown conditions which existed in prehistoric times, conditions of atmospheric pressures, temperatures, radioactivity, unknown catalyzers, etc., as already mentioned, conditions that is which could have caused reactions and changes of an entirely different nature and tempo from those known under the present day orderly processes of nature. One cannot exclude the possibility that dinosaurs existed 5,722 years ago and became fossilized under terrific natural cataclysms in the course of a few years rather than in millions of years, since we have no conceivable measurements of criteria of calculations under those unknown conditions. In other words, all of the evidence that we have is assuming the world is as it is now, right? If we go back to radioactive, is assuming that was always at the same pace, assuming expansion always at the same pace, assuming everything always according to the same pace as we have now, Then when we work our way backwards, we have that. But who's to say that it was always the same? And actually, Sephorno understands that the Mabul at the time of the flood, that is where things changed drastically in terms of all of these atmospheric pressures and effects that it has on the world as we see it. B, even assuming that the period of time which the Torah allows for the age of the world is definitely too short for fossilization, we can still readily accept the possibility that God created ready fossils, bones, or skeletons for reasons best known to him, just as he could create ready living organisms, a complete man, and such ready products as oil, coal, or diamonds without any evolutionary process. As for the question, if it be true as above, B, why did God have to create fossils in the first place? The answer is simple. We cannot know the reason why God chose this manner of creation in preference to another, and whatever theory of creation is accepted, the question always remains unanswered. The question why create a fossil is no more valid than the question why create an atom. Certainly, such a question cannot serve as a sound argument, much less a logical basis for the evolutionary theory.
Well, why dinosaurs?
Why dinosaurs? Why atoms? That's what he's saying, right? Why fossils? Why atoms? Now, perhaps I could propose a reason, right? Why fossils, right? Oh, so we can drive our cars. Meaning, what is oil that's being extracted from the earth? That is the results of these decomposed life, right? Whatever it is, that then becomes, right, oil deposits in the earth. So maybe why did God create the world with fossils? Maybe so we could drive our cars. Because that's what filled and continues to fill at a very slow pace, right? The oil deposits in the earth. Perhaps, I don't know.
When we have an ant,
Dinosaurs, what would little boys play with?
That's right. And what will we do in the Museum of Natural History? It'll be very, very boring. Yes, Janet.
whenever we have an ant attack and then we have like a pile of ants, I'll always joke to Roger, well, if it gets bigger, we can sell oil and shell white starches to the floor.
That's it. See that? Okay. Now we have different statements of the sages, right? And we're talking about well before there was this, well before dinosaurs were discovered, which mostly in the 1800s when they first started to discover them. So this was not apologetics. This was written thousands of years before. These were taught thousands of years before that. We have the Gemara, the Talmud, Babylonian Talmud, Rosh Hashanah, source number 4, Amr Shua ben Levi, Kol Maaseh Bereshis B'Kol Matan Nivra'u. All the acts of creation were created B'Kol Matan, in their full, mature stature. Rashi explains, V'hainu eitz pri, Roi haya liton pri miyad. It was bearing fruits right away. Now, trees, when you plant a tree, right, when it first comes out, it's not carrying any fruits. So it was all B'Kol Matan. Or the Medrash from Breshit Rabbah, Vayitzar Hashem Elokim et Adam, Afar min Adama. God created Adam as Afar min, right? Typically translated as Afar, dust from the earth. But Afar, Rabbi Yoshua ben Simon Omer, Ofer. Ofer, which means a young man. Olam al miliato nivra. The world was created in its full, I'm number 5 now in Hebrew, in its full state. Azrav Shimon, Av Chava al miliuta nivret. Chava, in her full, as a mature woman, was created. Adam b'Chava, k'bnei esrim shana nivreu. As like 20-year-olds. That's how it says that they were created.
And it's usually some midrashim or something, don't they usually say that Cain and Abel were born as fully adult.
Yeah.
Not babies.
All on that first day.
But this,
Yeah.
this does kind of contradict that the earth had not, the herbage and seed had not grown because had been no rain on the earth. So, I mean, and then it needed man's prayers and the rain to sprout, to finish sprouting.
Yeah. Like I said, there are many.
Since that's not fully mature. If the seed still hadn't sprouted.
In the Garden of Eden, it certainly had.
Okay.
Or that's leading up to that point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
I never thought about this until right now, but actually there were 7 people around. I mean, counting Adam and Eve, that is. Because Cain and Abel both had twins, and then there was a third one. They were all born adults.
They were all born that first day of creation, as we have it, on the 6th day of creation. And that's why the curse to Chava is first that you will have difficulty, you'll have hardships in raising children, and then speaking about the difficulty of labor and birth. You think the order should be labor, labor, birth, raising kids. But if you look in the psukim, the verses, the order is raising kids, labor, birth. Because you already had those. Yeah. Yes, Dov.
Talking about coming into being an adult, the trees were completely all fruit.
Correct. That's it. Correct. Good. Approach number 2. The 6 days of creation, what Steve was saying before, ran at a different speed. The 6 days are real days, and yet 15 billion years at the same time. Okay. This approach, adopted by Shimon Schwab and the Leshem, it proposed the creation of man on the day 6 of the world did not run at the same pace. In fact, although the 6 days of creation were indeed 6 24-hour periods, the world ran at such a speed as would take billions of years by our current reckoning. As such, the world is really 57, 86 years old, but just squeezed a lot into the first 6 days. Meaning what? Building on the analysis of Rabbi Schwab, Dr. Gerald Schroeder has produced a theory based on the theory of relativity, that the passage of time will differ depending on velocity and gravity. Right? Famous ideas. If you have these twins, right, identical twins, and one of them is here on Earth, the other one is in a spaceship that is circling the Earth for a period of time, they will age differently. They will visibly age differently. Let's see what he means over here. So too, each day of creation was a 24-hour day from the perspective of the creator of the expanding universe at that time. Day 1, not a first day, seeing time from the beginning. Now, the fact that the Bible tells us there is evening and morning, day 1, comes to teach us from a biblical perspective, from near the beginning looking forward. We look back in time and say the universe is 15 billion years old. But as every scientist knows, when we say the universe is 15 billion years old, there's half a sentence that they don't say. The universe is 15 billion years old as seen from the time-space coordinates of the Earth. The key is that the Torah looks forward in time from very different time-space coordinates when the universe was small. Since then, the universe has expanded out. Space stretches, and that stretching of space totally changes the perception of time. Okay. Now, imagine going back billions of years. I'm just going to skip a little because we're running late here. I'm going to the middle of that paragraph. Imagine this community has a laser shooting out a blast of light every second. Every second, there's a pulse, pulse, pulse. And on each pulse, the following is printed. I'm sending you a pulse every second. Now, as we keep moving further and further and further from that point, like we said, it takes millions of years for the light of the star to reach us. So that light is being sent out every second. Okay? But by the time it reaches us, it is stretched out in time. Billions of years later, way far down the timeline, La Briut, God bless you. We here on Earth have a big satellite dish and receive that pulse of light that says, I'm sending you a pulse every second. Light travels 186,000 miles per second. So at the beginning, the two light pulses are separated by a second of travel, or 186,000 miles. Now they travel through space for billions of years until they reach the Earth. But wait a minute, the universe is not static, it is expanding. The universe expands by space stretching. That's not Torah, that's science. That space is stretching. So as these pulses travel through space for billions of years, space is stretching. What happened to these pulses? The space between them is also stretching. So the pulses get further and further apart. Billions of years later, when the first pulse arrives, we read, I'm sending you a pulse every second. A message from outer space. You wait for the next pulse to arrive. Does it arrive a second later? No, not a year later. Maybe billions of years later, because the amount of time this pulse of light has traveled through space will determine the amount of space stretching that has occurred. Right? He gives an example, right? If I write my name on a balloon, okay, so all those letters are closely intact. Now I inflate the balloon, all of a sudden each of those letters have gotten that much bigger. Okay, it's all when we stretch it out, and therefore, like next paragraph, 15 billion years or 6 days. Today, when we look back in time, we see approximately 15 billion years of history. Looking forward from when the universe is very small, that creation, that Big Bang, or whatever we'll call it, it was billions of times smaller. The Torah says 6 days. In truth, they both may be correct. What's exciting about the last few years in cosmology is we now have quantified the data to know the relationship of the view of time from the beginning of stable matter, the threshold energy of protons and neutrons, nucleosynthesis, relative to the view of time today. It is no longer science fiction. Textbooks, physics textbooks all bring the same number. The general relation between nucleosynthesis, that time near the beginning of the threshold energy when matter formed, and time today is a million, 12 zeros after a one. So when a view from the beginning looks forward, says, I'm sending you a pulse every second, we would not see the pulse every second. We see it every million seconds, because that's the stretching effect of the expansion of the universe. Therefore, he does the math over here. The Talmud tells the soul of Adam was created at 5.5 days after the beginning of the 6 days. That is a half day before the termination of day 6. At that moment, the cosmic calendar ceases and an earthbound calendar starts. So the measurement was until we, humankind, entered the scene. The measurement was from that point of beginning. Once we enter the scene, the clock is now moved to us. How would we see those days stretched? 5.5 days times a million gives us 5.5 million days. Dividing that by 365 days of a year, it comes out to be 15 billion years. NASA gives a value about 14 billion, right? That's not going to be an issue. What's a billion years? The 5.5 days, next paragraph, of Genesis are not of equal duration. Each time the universe doubles in size, the perception of time halves as we project that time backward toward the beginning of the universe, right? Because in the beginning, right, 1 to 2, right, we've added on 1, that's doubled. Now 2 to 4, we need 2 to double it. 4 to 8, we need 4 to double it. 8 to 16, 16 to 32, 64, 128, etc. Right? So therefore, the rate will not always be the same. The rate of doubling, that is the fractional rate of change, is very rapid at the beginning and decreases with time simply because as the universe gets larger and larger, even though the expansion rate is constant, it takes longer and longer for the overall size to double. Because of this, the earliest of the 6 days have most of the 15 billion years subtracted within them, right? So the way he breaks it down, according to the math, day 1 is 24 hours, is 8 billion, day 2, 4, day 3, 2, day 4, 1, a half, a quarter, giving us the 15.75 billion years. That's another approach. Third approach, and this is very, very fascinating. When the dinosaurs were first being discovered, so this was rocking the world of many of Bible-believing people. However, the Tiferes Yisroel saw this as not a challenge, but as an affirmation to teachings that we have. This approach is adopted. Approach number 3, there were worlds prior to our creation. Approach adopted by Aryeh Kaplan, right? It brings from classical source to show the present world may be then 57 years old. There were billions years of prior worlds before ours. Okay? It was evening and it was morning. It's taken by Chazal, number 11, I'm going to write to the English, to indicate there were many worlds in existence prior to our world, which Hashem subsequently destroyed. Rabbeinu Bachi in Bereshit, chapter 1, verse 3 states, this accounts for the mention of the Torah existing 2,000 years before the universe. Meaning, Vayihi Erev, Vayihi Boker, right? It says, and it was evening, and it was day. He understands that to mean that there were times prior to this, and now the Torah is picking up at our present iteration. Idea also found in Rama and Rabbi, the Rakanti adopts the concept of recurring cycles of creation, destruction, and renewal. Right? That there were these different iterations of this world. Right? Hakime in the verse in Eov, Hakime enosh yamecha imshnotecha kime gaver. Okay? Now, in other words, we have many teachings of the sages of different iterations of this world before our present iteration. So therefore, whoever's phone it is, if you could just turn it off, would be helpful. Therefore, when we discover evidence of creatures that are not from our world as we know it, that was viewed not as a challenge, but as we have found evidence for that. By going into the crevices of this earth, we have found evidence of creatures nothing like we have experienced, of earlier worlds or earlier iterations of this world. So the Torah would then be talking about this time around. Tiferet Yisroel is in the Mishnah book. As it's printed, we have some classic commentators, and he was in the 1800s. One of them is the Tiferet Yisroel, and he says there as follows. Source number 20. Ulefi aniyat daiti. Otan abnei adam. The way it appears, the way as I understand it, those people, human beings, shahayu ba'olam kadum, which existed in what we call the prehistoric world, shenikra'in, that are called pre-Adamitan, pre-Adamite, right, prehistoric. Ratzulam habnei adam shayu ba'olam kodem briat adam arishon ha'achshavi, that were there before the creation of Adam and Eve. These are the 974 Dorot that are mentioned in the Talmud, tractate of Shabbat, that were created before the world as we know it. In other words, according to this classic commentator, Adam and Eve were not the first human beings. They were the first human beings to have this soul, this neshama, this spiritual component, this composite of being a physical being and a spiritual being. All animals are alive, and they have what's called a nefesh chaya, a living spirit. They don't have a neshama. I hate to go against the famous movie name, All Good Dogs Go to Heaven. We don't really believe that, right? Animals have a living spirit. They don't have a soul. Human beings, from Adam and even on, are a composite of two beings, a physical being and a spiritual being. The physical being ultimately dies, and the spiritual being then continues on to the next stage of that person's existence, as we went through in depth in our 4-part series of the afterlife. But that began with Adam. So the fact that we have Neanderthal man and all these other human or semi-human or almost human as we know it creatures, that is not a challenge to our belief and faith. 21, Adam was merely the first human being created in the latest cycle. According to these opinions, it would seem that man already had the physical and mental capacities that we possess as early as 974 generations before Adam, or some 25,000 years ago.
It wouldn't be consistent with him being born at 20 years old. It wouldn't be consistent with him being born 20
Unless we'd say that that's when this neshama was given to him. Right? Yeah, but like I said before, all three of these don't necessarily agree with one another. These are three different approaches. Yes.
I think the second approach, as I remember, the Schroeder book incorporates the third approach as a part of it. He also
It
talks-
could.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About creating the worlds, supernovas blowing up, and how
Yeah.
gradually.
Yeah.
Because initially, no matter was created, just energy.
Yeah.
So he shows it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
And that could have been during any of these earlier iterations.
Question. My Hebrew is very bad. My English is still not, but still. And there was evening and there was morning, day one. But in Hebrew it's Yom Echad, right?
Correct.
And the point that Schroeder is trying to make, and that you just reiterated, that it proves that the Torah is looking from that point forward.
Correct.
But
Correct.
as I understand English, day one has some implication of a sequence. Maybe the better translation would be one day. Is there a difference?
I'm not sure. I hear what you're saying.
One day is one day. Day one kind of implies that day one out of what?
Yeah, could be. Though, you see, by the other days, it doesn't say day two. It says second, third, fourth. Yeah.
Some translations say the first day, which is definitely wrong.
Correct. It doesn't say Yom Rishon, Sheni, first, second, third. It says day one, and then switches to the second, third.
And as far as the number of years, he has the formula.
Yeah.
If
if someone would want to read up more on the second approach, so you could simply Google Dr. Gerald Schroeder, and he has articles and articles written on this. He has books on it, Genesis and the Big Bang, right? He has many, many articles written on this. But like I said, for me personally, what this does is it gives me possibilities, right? Without necessarily saying this or that, but it gives approaches, right? What is the actual? We'll discuss it together. We'll gather again after 120 years, and we'll review the class and what we know then, and we could
God
contrast it.
God willing.
Amen.
We learn Talmud in the morning, right? And it seems like a fundamental aspect of Jewish learning is to take language and then creatively, turn it upside down and do all sorts of acrobatics with language. So it's not surprising to me that we don't necessarily have to take what seems simple interpretation of this all the time. The rabbis are taking language and doing. There's so many statements in the Talmud that they end up interpreting completely. You would never imagine.
And also keep in mind that language is very limiting. Language is limited to our experiences and our world and that which, right? We don't have words for things that are beyond the realm of our experience. So therefore, when the Torah is giving us its description, it can only be a very, very stunted, limited, stymied representation of what they really of what was. I always like to point out, if we were to go with Big Bang, and the Torah was going to describe this explosion of energy and matter using a word that is a pretty good description of it as we stand here today in the year 2025, and will also be comprehensible to people thousands of years ago, it would say or light, an explosion of light. That's what it was.
When you just said that, though, I flashed on Sinai. That, all the thunder and the mountain trembling and the fire around it, and it's, all that. It seemed like there was a hint of parallel between Sinai and Big Bang.
Well, I think there's sort of two creations, right? There's Vase Bereshit, like we say in Finnish. Also, we say Zeichel Vase Bereshit, Zeichel L'Tziat Mitzrayim. So there is this, I think, this
Okay.
Tohu Vavohu and Ma'amad Har Sinai.
Nice seeing you, Chaya. I don't hear you. Sorry, you can email me. Okay. You're in your place over there? Give me a thumbs up, a thumbs down. It looks beautiful. It looks beautiful. Baruch Hashem. Okay, my friends, we'll call it over here. Be well.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Roger and Brandon. Good to have you all in, Brandon. Good.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay. Be well, my friends.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Be well, everybody.